I arrived for my night shift at Silver Pines Care Facility, with my scrubs still damp at the sleeves from the rain outside and the faint smell of lavender soap clinging to me as if it were trying to give me strength I did not feel. The hallway lights flickered in that tired way they always did after sundown, casting long shadows that stretched like warnings across the floor. I held my patient list in one hand, still warm from the printer, and when I reached room 212, the room assigned to me for the week, I pushed the door gently just enough to step inside. Before I could take a second step, head nurse Karen's sharp voice cut through the dim corridor behind me. "Not your patient." I turned confused because her eyes were already narrowed as if she had been waiting for the chance to stop me. "The family does not want rookies touching him," she said loud enough for every aide and nurse within 20 feet to hear. The words hit harder than I expected. A couple of nurses nearby shifted awkwardly, one whispering something I could not hear but could feel. They all knew I was new. Young, 24, and not the type anyone expected to handle a complicated case like Arthur Finch, a partially comatose 78-year-old man whose medical chart was thicker than a Bible and twice as intimidating. But the assignment sheet in my hand had my name next to his room. I swallowed and lifted the paper a little. "My name is on the list," I said quietly, trying not to sound as embarrassed as I felt. Karen stepped closer, her shoes squeaking against the waxed floor. "Lists get changed. If his son saw you walk in there, he'd have a fit. We do not take risks with this one." The humiliation rose in my throat like heat. I could feel every pair of eyes in the hallway pressing into my back. I was new, yes, but I was not incompetent. I needed this job. I worked hard, and yet in that moment, they all saw me as a child who wandered into the wrong place. I took a slow breath, the kind my father taught me to take before singing. With steady hands, I pushed the door open anyway and stepped inside. Karen scoffed behind me, but she did not follow. The room was dim except for the soft glow of the monitor screens. Rain streaked across the window, the sky outside flashing with distant lightning that briefly illuminated Arthur's still face. He lay motionless, propped slightly on his side, his silver hair smoothed back neatly by someone earlier in the day. His hands rested on the blanket like fragile stones set upon quiet water. I closed the door gently, shutting out the noise of judgment and whispers. For a long moment I stood there unsure if I wanted to cry or breathe. Finally, I took a step closer to his bed. "Hi, Arthur," I said softly, my voice trembling only at the edges. "I am here for you tonight. You do not know me yet, but I am here." The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to the weight inside my chest. I reached out, brushing a small wrinkle from the blanket near his arm, the way I used to smooth sheets for my father when he was too weak to do it himself. A memory stirred then, my father lying in a hospital bed like this one, and me humming the first tune he ever taught me. Music had always been the only thing that steadied my hands. Without allowing myself time to overthink, I leaned closer and said, "I'm going to sing for you a little, just to keep the room warm." My voice started small, barely louder than breath, carrying an old tune from my childhood. The room softened as I sang the kind of softness that feels like a hand on your back telling you not to give up. Then the door flew open. Karen stormed in, her face twisted with irritation. "What do you think you're doing, Emily? This is a medical facility, not a karaoke night." My voice stopped instantly. Shame burned through every corner of me. I stepped back from the bed, feeling the humiliation like a heavy towel thrown over my shoulders. But before I could apologize, something else caught my eye. Behind Karen in the hallway stood a man I had never seen. He was drenched from the rain, his dark hair pushed back and wet his coat dripping onto the floor. He leaned just enough into the doorway to see me clearly, but he was not looking at Karen. He was looking at me, at the way I stood frozen, at the way my voice had died in the air, at the way I tried to be gentle in a place that did not always reward gentleness. There was something in his eyes I could not name, something deep, something wounded, something that recognized the pain of being dismissed. I did not know then that he was Nathan Finch Arthur's son, a millionaire tech founder whose wealth made people step sideways in hallways and correct their posture. I did not know he had been watching long enough to hear part of my song. I only knew that he did not look away. And somehow, in the space of a heartbeat, everything shifted, because whatever he saw in that moment would change every direction my life was about to take. The next evening, when I returned to Silver Pines, I could already feel the shift in the air before I even set foot inside. Eyes followed me differently now, not with curiosity, but with something closer to irritation, as if my presence alone made the halls feel uneven. Karen's complaint had clearly traveled faster than truth usually could. Two nurses near the supply closet went silent as soon as I walked by, their glances sharp enough to scratch skin. One of them muttered "rookie" under her breath, not even trying to hide it. Another whispered something about lucky to still have a job after last night. Their voices hit the tender places inside me that had already been scraped raw the night before, but I kept walking. I had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only way to stay standing. My first stop was the assignment board. My heart thudded when I saw it. The name, Emily Reed, was still written clearly next to room 212. They had not removed me. They had not reassigned me. Whether it was an oversight or an act of deliberate fairness from someone I would never know, the name stayed. And so would I. I took the patient chart from the bin, ignoring how Karen glared from behind the main desk, as if the sight of me touching paperwork offended her personally. "You're still on him," she said with a clipped tone, not bothering to hide her disapproval. "The family might not appreciate your style." My style. Singing to a lonely man in a cold room was now considered a flaw. I did not answer because nothing I could say would land safely. I walked down the hall toward Arthur's room with the weight of eyes trailing me like shadows. When I entered the room, felt just as it did the night before, dim quiet suspended between life and something close to stillness. The only thing different was the faint hum in my chest, a strange awareness I could not explain. I stepped close to the bed and whispered, "I'm here again, Arthur. I'm not sure what you remember, if anything at all, but you're not alone tonight." His chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of someone asleep in a world far away from this one. As I smoothed the blanket again the way I had done the night before, something warm flickered inside me, a sense of rightness, of purpose. Caring for him felt important in a way I could not articulate, and singing, even though I was not supposed to, felt necessary, not for me, but for him. Yet the memory of Karen's voice in the doorway stopped me. This is a medical facility, not a karaoke night. I swallowed, thinking maybe I should not sing. Maybe I should do exactly what was expected and nothing more. Maybe I should stay small and quiet so no one had a reason to push me out. But then I remembered the way Arthur's finger had twitched, the way he seemed to respond when I spoke softly, the way that man in the hallway had looked at me like he had witnessed a moment worth protecting. So I sat down again. Same chair, same place, same feeling of something invisible connecting the air between us. And I sang. Softly at first, so quiet the monitors almost drowned it out. Then a little louder as my voice gained confidence. I focused on Arthur's expressionless face, on the curve of his cheek, on the faint tremor in his lower lip. Music had always been the only language I spoke fluently without fear. My father used to tell me that singing was not about sound. It was about offering your breath so someone else could find theirs. As I finished the first verse, I caught a reflection in the small window of the room's supply cabinet. A tall shadow stood just outside the doorway, still, silent, listening. My breath caught. Him. The same man from last night. His presence was unmistakable, even in reflection. I could see the outline of his shoulders, the faint dip of his head, the stillness that felt almost reverent. He was not watching out of suspicion, not out of boredom, but out of something like longing. He was back. Again. I felt my face warm with equal parts confusion and embarrassment. Why was he here? What did he want? Why me? Why this room? Why this song? I kept singing, my voice trembling now for a different reason. Halfway through the melody, he shifted slightly in the reflection. Not enough to be intrusive, but enough to let me know he was still there, still listening, still anchored to this doorway as if something here held him. And then I realized something that made the back of my neck prickle. He had been here last night before Karen yelled at me. He had heard my voice. He had seen the way she humiliated me, and he had not looked away. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. When the song ended, I stayed silent for a long time, uncertain whether he was still standing there. Eventually, I forced myself to glance toward the doorway. It was empty. He was gone. But something in the room felt changed, warmer, like a candle someone had lit and then stepped away from trusting the flame to keep burning on its own. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks. Changing linens, checking vitals, cleaning up after restless residents. But every time I walked down the hall, I felt the weight of whispers behind me. She thinks she is special. She thinks she is better. She is going to get fired. Let her. We could use the hours. And yet none of them mattered as much as the question that kept circling my thoughts like a persistent melody. Who was he? And why did he come back to hear me sing again? Part 2 ends with that feeling of questions rising in my chest, brighter than fear, more insistent than doubt. A quiet truth forming inside me that I did not yet have the courage to speak aloud. Maybe for the first time since I started this job, someone saw me, really saw me. And that single possibility made my heart feel steadier than it had in a long time. The following night, when I walked into Silver Pines, there was a strange quietness in the air, as if the entire building was holding its breath. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just another shift, just another set of hours to endure, but deep inside, something felt different, like a small current humming just under my skin. When I reached the assignment board and saw my name still next to room 212, my chest loosened with relief. No reassignment. No punishment, no silent removal. Somehow, against expectation, I still belonged here, at least on paper. As I walked toward Arthur's room, the hallway lights buzzed softly above me. The scent of disinfectant was sharp, cold, and familiar. A tech wheeled a blood pressure cart past me, barely glancing up. A nurse laughed loudly at the far end of the corridor, the sound echoing off the tile. Every detail felt heightened, like the world was preparing for something I could not yet see. When I pushed open the door to room 212, the darkness inside embraced me like an old friend. Only the faint glow from the small lamp near the window illuminated Arthur's still figure. Outside, rain fell in thin sheets tapping gently against the glass. I stepped closer and checked his vitals, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing guide my own. His hand lay motionless beside him, but I remembered the way his finger had twitched the night before. A movement so small that anyone else would have missed it, but not me, and not the man who had watched from the doorway. My throat tightened a little. I sat in the same chair again, folded my hands in my lap, and let the quiet settle around me. For a moment, I told myself to resist the urge to sing, to behave, to avoid attention. But the silence inside this room was the kind that needed music, and I felt it as clearly as I felt my own pulse. So I took a breath and began. The first notes came gently soft enough that they wove into the hum of the machines rather than rising above them. Arthur's face remained still, but I imagined, perhaps foolishly, that something in him might be listening, reaching, waiting. Halfway through the first verse, the door creaked softly. My voice faltered, then steadied as I kept singing. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I knew that presence now, the quiet weight of someone standing at the threshold. He was here again. The awareness made my chest warm and tight at the same time. When I finally reached the last word, letting it linger in the dim room, silence wrapped around us like a blanket. For the first time, he stepped inside, only a step just past the doorway. But it was enough to make my breath catch. His voice, when it came, was low and careful, as if he was afraid the wrong tone might break something fragile in the air. Don't stop. 2 simple words. 2 words that struck me with more force than any insult Karen had ever thrown. I turned slowly, my hands still resting in my lap. He stood there with his coat unbuttoned, rain dampening the shoulders. Dark hair, slightly disheveled eyes fixed on me in a way that made my pulse stumble. I scrambled to my feet. I am sorry I wasn't trying to disturb anyone. I know singing isn't exactly recommended. His expression softened and he shook his head. You weren't disturbing anyone. His eyes moved past me to Arthur. In fact, this is the first time this room has felt warm in months. Something in the way he said it made my throat tighten. The sincerity in his voice settled deep into me, steadying me. I glanced toward the doorway, expecting Karen or someone else to appear and ruin the moment. Nobody was there. It was just him. And me. And Arthur. He stepped farther into the room, slow, deliberate steps, as if he was entering sacred ground. I thought maybe he would stand near the wall again, but instead, he moved toward the foot of the bed, eyes never leaving Arthur's face. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just watched his father, and the grief that flickered across his features was so raw I felt it like a punch in the chest. You care about him, I said softly before I could stop myself. He closed his eyes briefly as if the words hit somewhere sensitive. Yes, more than I have shown. He looked back at me, his gaze steady. Thank you for treating him like he is still here. Not everyone does. Heat rose in my cheeks. I looked down, my fingers twisting nervously. I believe people can still hear us even when they can't answer. My dad used to tell me that singing reaches parts of the heart nothing else can reach. A small, almost disbelieving smile touched his mouth, a smile that made him look younger, gentler. He nodded once as if he understood that better than I realized. I want to hear you sing again. The words were quiet but full of intent. They made something inside me tremble. I hesitated. If the staff hears... He cut me off with a shake of his head. I don't care about them. I care about him. And I think your voice matters more than any policy taped to the wall. My breath caught at the honesty of it, at the weight of those words. Nobody in this building had ever spoken to me like that. Nobody had ever seen value in something I offered. His eyes softened as he took a step closer. I didn't expect to hear music tonight, but I'm glad I did. Music was what my mother used to bring into this house. She made these rooms feel alive. I saw the pain in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. I hadn't known anything about him until now, but those few sentences told me so much. Loss, distance, memories he could barely speak of. I swallowed. I can sing again if you want. He nodded slowly, his expression breaking open into something small and grateful. Please. So I did. My voice trembled at first, but then it steadied as I watched the way his shoulders slowly dropped, the way something heavy inside him seemed to loosen. As if for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to breathe. When the song ended, he exhaled and whispered thank you, 2 simple words. But they reached me in places I had long believed empty. He stepped back toward the door. I will see you tomorrow. My heart skipped. He said it as a promise, not a question. And before I could find the right words to respond, he slipped out of the room, leaving behind a warmth that did not disappear even after the door closed. I sat there again alone with Arthur, my pulse still unsteady. He finally spoke to me, and somehow, without meaning to, he changed the air I breathed. For the next several nights, something unspoken yet undeniable settled into a rhythm between us, a rhythm that neither of us acknowledged with words, but both of us lived out with startling consistency. Every evening as the clock approached 9, I would feel it before it happened, a quiet certainty threading itself through my chest like a familiar melody. And at exactly 9, he would appear. Not inside the room, not beside me, not even close enough to pretend it was coincidence. He simply stood outside the partially open door, just within the glow of the hallway lights, his silhouette calm and steady, a quiet witness to a world no one else cared to see. He never interrupted, never cleared his throat, never shifted his weight loudly. It was as if he understood instinctively that this room was fragile, that Arthur's silence was delicate, and that my voice was the only thing holding the air together. On the first night after he spoke to me, I felt nervous, my palms damp as I adjusted Arthur's blanket. I kept glancing toward the doorway, expecting him, fearing he would not come, hoping he would. When he finally appeared exactly as he had said he would, his presence brought with it a warmth I could not explain. I sat down and began to sing, and even though he stayed outside, his attention wrapped itself around me like a soft shawl. He was listening with his entire being. The second night, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely over his chest, his face half lit by the dim hall lights. I could feel his eyes on me even when I did not look. Whenever my voice wavered, his expression reflected in the small cabinet mirror seemed to steady as if he was silently lending me strength. That was the night I realized he remembered things I said without meaning to. "You always start with the same song," he said quietly after I finished not stepping inside but not leaving either. "Why that one?" I flushed. "My dad used to hum it when I was scared. It made the world feel less sharp." He nodded once, almost thoughtfully. "It still does." His voice was gentle, carrying something deeper beneath it, a kind of gratitude that felt too intimate to be casual. On the third night, the rain was heavy, stamping against the windows and filling the room with the soft percussion of a storm. The temperature dropped enough that I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. When I sat shivering slightly, he noticed. "I'm sorry," he said, and a moment later, something warm dropped over my shoulders. His coat. Without stepping fully inside, he reached just far enough to place it around me, fingers brushing the fabric near my shoulder, but never my skin. He looked almost embarrassed, as if he had crossed a line he had drawn for himself. I tried to hand it back, but he shook his head. "Keep it for tonight. It suits you better than the cold does." I wore it the whole shift. Even after he left, it kept a warmth around me that felt nothing like the chill of the facility. By the fourth night, there was no denying it anymore. We had created a space that belonged to us, quiet and secret and strangely sacred. He showed up again at 9, the exactness almost comforting. I found myself waiting for the sound of his footsteps approaching, soft, steady, assured, before opening Arthur's chart or adjusting the blankets. That evening, his posture was more relaxed. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly as he listened. I caught glimpses of his expression in the mirror, pensive, tender, moved in ways he did not try to hide. When the song ended, he spoke before I could. "You said once that people can hear even when they cannot respond. Do you really believe that?" His question was quiet but filled with a weight that felt personal. I turned slightly toward him. "I do. I always have." My father stopped responding before he passed, but when I sang to him, his breathing slowed like he was resting. I believe that meant something. His eyes softened. "My mother used to say the same thing. She believed sound could reach the parts of people we cannot touch." I held his gaze for a moment longer, feeling something fragile but profound settling between us. It felt almost like two people standing at opposite sides of a bridge, realizing they had already begun walking toward each other without meaning to. On the fifth night, I noticed something new. As I sang, Arthur's fingers twitched again. It was subtle, just a slight shift but not imaginary. I drew in a sharp breath and leaned closer, watching carefully. Nathan stood straighter. "Did he move?" "Yes." I nodded, too stunned to fully process it. He really did. Nathan's chest rose with a sharp inhale, his eyes widening with a mix of disbelief and hope. His voice came out hushed, almost reverent. "Keep singing, please." I did, and with every note, the room seemed to breathe a little deeper. Afterward, Nathan lingered longer than usual at the doorway. He did not say anything at first. He just looked at Arthur with a tenderness that told me everything words could not. Then he looked at me. "My father hasn't responded to anything in months. I don't know what you're doing, but I think you're reaching him." His voice cracked on the last word. I stood frozen, my own heart swelling with something that felt like awe. It was the first time he had said the word father out loud in my presence. The first time I saw the raw ache behind his calm exterior. Before he left, he said quietly, "See you tomorrow." And this time, the words felt like a promise he needed as much as I did. By the sixth night, it had become something neither of us questioned. He came back every night. He stood outside, never crossing fully into the room, as if respecting a boundary he believed mattered. And I sang for Arthur. But somewhere along the way, I realized something that made my breath stumble. I wasn't singing only for Arthur anymore. Part of me was singing for him too. By the time I reached Silver Pines the next evening, the air outside had shifted into that strange quiet that comes right before a storm. a heavy stillness that presses against your skin as if the sky itself is waiting. I felt it echo inside me as I walked through the automatic doors, my badge swinging lightly at my chest. The hallways were unusually subdued, almost wary, as if the building sensed something I had not yet seen. When I approached room 212, the door was ajar just enough for a sliver of warm light to spill onto the floor. I paused before entering, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. And there he was, Nathan. Exactly where he always stood at the threshold, one hand resting loosely against the frame, his posture calm, but his eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. I didn't know why he looked that way, but the moment our gazes met, something deep inside me steadied. "You're here," he said softly, as though the confirmation mattered more than it should have. I nodded. "Of course." His shoulders lowered a little, the tiniest release of tension, and without another word, he stepped back into his usual position just outside the room. It was our ritual now, as natural as breathing. I slipped into the familiar stillness of the room, where Arthur lay exactly as he had every night, his face illuminated by the soft lamp near the window. Rain began tapping gently against the glass, a gentle percussion that joined the rhythm of the monitors. I adjusted Arthur's blanket, smoothing the fabric over his chest, and for a moment my fingers stilled on his hand. It was warm, warmer than usual. I swallowed hard. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it bloomed anyway. I sat down in my chair, inhaled deeply, and began to sing. The first note was soft, unsure trembling like a leaf caught in wind, but as I kept going, the melody grew stronger, warmed by memory and longing. It filled the room the way light fills a dark corner. And then it happened. At first, I thought it was just my imagination again, a flicker of hope playing tricks on me. But no, it wasn't that. Arthur moved. Just the slightest twitch, a faint lift of his index finger, but enough to stop the world. My voice caught in my throat. I froze, staring at his hand, my breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and awe. Nathan caught it first. "Emily." His voice broke on my name. "Did he?" "Yes." I whispered, my voice barely a sound. "He did." Nathan stepped closer, almost inside the room, one hand reaching out instinctively before he pulled it back, respecting that invisible line he always honored. Arthur's monitor beeped a fraction faster, a change so subtle only someone who had listened to it night after night would notice. His eyelids fluttered. Just once. But it was enough to send a tremor through my entire body. I leaned forward, my voice shaking as I whispered, "Arthur, I'm right here. It's Emily." Something shifted in his face, just a flicker, the faintest twitch of awareness. A miracle too small to shout about, but too real to ignore. Nathan pressed a hand to his mouth, his eyes shining with something like heartbreak and hope blended together. "My father hasn't done that in months." His voice was thick, heavy with emotion he had no time to hide. My eyes burned, but I blinked hard and forced myself to stay steady for both of them. I lifted Arthur's hand, gently cradling it between my palms. His fingers twitched again, this time more deliberately, curling the slightest bit, as though he were trying to hold on to something or someone. Nathan's breath caught audibly. "Emily, keep going, please." His words were not a command, but a plea. A raw, vulnerable plea that cut through the air and landed straight in my chest. So I sang. My voice trembled not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. The melody felt different this time, fuller, like it carried pieces of all three of us. I watched Arthur's face closely as I sang, and then, mid-verse, his lips parted. Not enough for words, but enough to form a whisper that was not sound but intention. Nathan stumbled a step forward, unable to stop himself now. "Dad! Dad, can you hear us?" Arthur's eyelashes fluttered again, slower this time, as if lifting through water. His chest expanded deeper than before, a fuller breath, a conscious breath. I felt tears spill over despite my attempt to stay composed. I wasn't imagining it. Neither was Nathan. Something was waking up. Behind me, a sharp voice suddenly sliced through the moment. "What is going on in here, Karen?" Her shoes clicked hard against the floor as she stormed in irritation, radiating from her like heat. I stood, quickly wiping at my cheeks. He moved, I said, still breathless. He actually, Karen scoffed. These patients twitch sometimes. It's involuntary. Do not give the family false hope. Her words struck me like cold water, but before I could respond, Nathan stepped fully inside the room for the first time. No hesitation. No pause. He positioned himself between me and Karen, his expression set with a resolve so sharp it silenced her instantly. He moved because she was singing, because she talks to him like he's still human. He turned to me, his voice gentler as he added, "Don't let anyone tell you this didn't happen." Karen blinked, thrown off, opening and closing her mouth like she wasn't sure how to respond now that she understood who she was talking to. But Nathan didn't give her time to recover. "I'll be speaking with administration about this," he said coldly. "She'll continue caring for my father." Karen's face went pale. She stepped back, her indignation evaporating as the weight of his words sank in. And then she left. The room grew quiet again, a soft, reverent quiet. I turned back to Arthur, unable to stop the tremble in my hands. Nathan's voice softened. "You reached him. I don't know how, but you did." Our eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between us. Something fragile and deeply human. The kind of moment that rearranges the furniture inside a person's heart. I looked down at Arthur, whose fingers twitched once more beneath mine. He was still in there, and somehow, impossibly, he was reaching toward us. The next night, I arrived earlier than usual, unable to quiet the restless mix of hope and fear humming through my body. The memory of Arthur's fingers twitching had replayed in my mind all day like a fragile miracle I was terrified might disappear if I spoke about it out loud. Part of me wanted to run to anyone who would listen and shout that something extraordinary had happened, but another part, the quieter, wiser part, held me still. Some miracles are meant to unfold slowly. When I stepped through the doors of Silver Pines, the staff was unusually silent. A few nurses glanced at me not with the usual disdain, but with something closer to confusion, maybe curiosity. Karen avoided my gaze entirely, her face flushed each time our paths nearly crossed. It was clear Nathan's presence and authority from the night before had unsettled the rigid hierarchy they clung to, but none of that mattered. All I could think about was Arthur. I walked faster down the hall, my palms damp, my heart thudding in anticipation. When I turned the corner toward room 212, I saw him immediately. Nathan. He stood at the door exactly where he always waited, except tonight felt different. His posture was tense, shoulders rigid, his jaw tight as though he had been holding his breath for a very long time. The moment he saw me, something in him softened. "You're here." His voice carried relief so deep it made my chest ache. "Of course." I stepped closer, and for a moment we simply stood there, suspended inside the same unspoken hope. He moved aside to let me enter, but instead of retreating to his usual spot outside, he lingered in the doorway, torn between stepping in and staying back. I approached the bed, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating Arthur's still figure. He looked the same eyes-closed expression, calm, breathing, slow and steady. But something felt changed, as if the space around him held a new kind of awareness. I took his hand, gently rubbing the back of it with my thumb. "Hi, Arthur. I'm here again." It was the same greeting I'd said every night, but tonight, the words felt heavier, fuller. Nathan stood behind me, watching his breath barely audible. "Should I sing?" I asked softly, glancing at him. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Yes, please." I sat in the chair beside the bed, took a breath, and began to sing the song that had become our ritual, our bridge to the unreachable. The first notes filled the room delicate and trembling, but soon steadied into something warm and certain. I poured everything into it. My fear, my hope, my belief that sound could reach where hands could not. Nathan leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on his father, his face open in a way I had never seen. As I reached the second verse, Arthur's breathing shifted. It was small, a deeper inhale, a subtle hitch, but noticeable enough that I faltered. Nathan straightened immediately. "Did he—" His voice cracked before he could finish. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart felt like it had leaped into my throat. I continued singing, my voice trembling with anticipation. And then it happened. His lips moved, not a reflex, not a twitch, a deliberate effort, a quiet shaping of sound. I froze mid-note, leaning forward so fast my chair nearly tipped. "Arthur." My voice came out as a whisper. Nathan moved beside me now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Dad, can you hear us?" Arthur's fingers curled faintly around mine. His lips parted again. This time, a faint, broken sound escaped. Soft, barely formed, but real. A single whispered syllable. A breath shaped into meaning. Light. The word was fractured airy, almost like an exhale. But it was a word that belonged to someone awake, someone aware. Nathan's knees buckled, and for a moment I thought he might collapse. "Oh my God." His voice was soaked in tears. "Dad." His hand shook as he reached out, stopping just short of touching his father's arm, as if afraid a real touch might break the fragile miracle unfolding before us. I leaned closer, tears dripping down my cheeks, unable to contain the overwhelming emotion rising in my chest. "Arthur, it's Emily. I'm right here. Can you say something else?" Arthur blinked. His eyelids lifted just enough for me to see the faintest glimpse of blue. Nathan gasped, a quiet, reverent sound. His father was looking at him, not through him, at him. "Dad," Nathan whispered, his voice splintering. "It's me! It's Nathan!" Arthur's lips parted again, struggling, searching for sound. His voice was barely audible, weaker than the softest breath. But it came. "Son." The word was broken, fragile, a single syllable that weighed more than an entire lifetime of silence. Nathan crumpled forward, both hands over his mouth as a sob tore free, raw and uncontrolled. Years of pain, guilt, grief, and love poured out of him all at once. He pressed his forehead against the edge of the mattress, shaking. Arthur's fingers lifted again, reaching for him, trembling with effort. Nathan grabbed his hand carefully, almost fearfully, as though he couldn't believe it was real. "Dad, I'm here. I'm right here. It's okay. I've got you. I'm here." Tears streamed down my face as I watched them, this fractured family, finding each other in the quiet glow of a dim hospital lamp through a doorway that had waited too long. Arthur blinked again, his lips shaping one more whisper. Her voice. Nathan looked up at me, his eyes full of gratitude so raw it almost hurt to meet. "You did this. You." I shook my head, crying harder. "No." He found his way back. "I just sang." Nathan reached out and covered my hand with his trembling fingers. His touch was light, reverent, as if I were something fragile and holy. "You reached him, Emily. You gave him a way back to us." The storm outside broke, then thunder rolling through the sky, rain beating fiercely against the windows, as if the world itself was exhaling. Inside the small room, Arthur breathed again, deeper this time, and Nathan held his hand as though he had been waiting his entire life for this moment. I stayed beside them, silent and overwhelmed, realizing with every passing second that something inside this family had shifted forever, and that somehow, without ever meaning to, I had become part of it. For the rest of the night, Nathan barely left his father's side, gripping Arthur's hand like a man terrified to blink and lose what he'd just gotten back. I stood with them until Arthur drifted into a deeper, steadier sleep, the kind that comes after exertion and awakening. The monitors hummed soft and rhythmic, the storm outside calming into a gentle rain. When Nathan finally let go of his father's hand, he turned toward me, eyes red but brighter than I had ever seen them. He gestured to the hallway, silently asking if we could step outside. I followed him, my legs weak from the weight of everything that had happened. We walked down to the quiet lounge at the end of the wing, the one with tall windows that overlooked the courtyard. The rain streaked down the glass, catching the glow of the lampposts outside. Nathan sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly, as if he still didn't trust them not to shake. I sat down slowly beside him, close, but not too close, waiting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of thunder rolling away. When Nathan finally lifted his head, the expression on his face wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper, something like surrender. He looked down at his hands as he spoke. I haven't seen him look at me like that since I was a kid. His voice cracked just slightly, but he steadied it. There was a softness to it now, a gentleness that felt so different from the guarded calm he usually wore. I swallowed, unsure of what to say, wanting to give him space. He lifted his eyes to me again. My mom, she used to bring us together. She was the glue, the music in our home, the warmth. His voice thinned, like the memory itself was fraying at the edges. Arthur and I were never close. Not really. He was always on tour, always practicing, always chasing some perfect version of life that didn't include... He paused, looking away as emotion tightened his jaw. Didn't include us enough. I nodded slowly, encouraging him without pushing. He continued speaking in a low, contemplative voice. My mother was different. She made everything feel easy. She sang constantly. The kind of singing that made you feel safe even when everything else felt uncertain. A faint smile appeared on his lips, brief but real. She used to hum in the kitchen while she cooked. She hummed while she tucked me in. She even hummed when she argued with my dad, just quieter. It was her way of softening the edges. He turned his head toward the window, watching the rain. When she died, he whispered the words almost too fragile to release everything, just broke. He didn't cry at her funeral. Not once. I kept waiting for him to fall apart so I wouldn't have to be the only one who did. But he never did. He buried himself in his work, his concerts, his calendar, his travels. He buried everything except the guilt. My throat tightened. Nathan's voice lowered even more. I thought he didn't care. About her. About me. About anything that wasn't his violin. I thought I was invisible to him, that I didn't matter as long as he had somewhere to run. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the ache in his words. But after tonight, I'm not sure I understood anything at all. He leaned back against the couch, his eyes glistening. When you sang, he swallowed hard. You didn't just wake my father. You woke something in me too, something I didn't know was still alive. I felt my breath catch my chest tightening in a way that was both terrifying and tender. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small pendant, a silver circle engraved with a music note. My mom's, he said softly. She wore it every day. After she passed, Dad put it away. He said seeing it hurt too much. He rubbed the pendant with his thumb, lost in memory. When I heard you sing that first night, I swear, just for a second, I felt like she was in the room again. I looked away, tears burning at the edges of my vision. I didn't want him to see how deeply his words were affecting me. And then you talked to him like he was still here, like he mattered, like you knew him, and suddenly I just couldn't walk away anymore. He let out a tremored breath. I haven't told anyone this. No one. I wasn't sure what to say. Honored wasn't enough. Grateful didn't fit. So instead, I let my hand move slowly until it rested on the couch between us. Not touching him, just near, close enough to tell him I was here. Nathan looked at my hand, then at me. His eyes softened, a warmth blooming in the tired lines of his face. You're not like anyone I've ever met, he said quietly. And the way he said it made my heart pull tight in my chest. I exhaled my voice barely above a whisper. Neither are you. For a long moment, we simply sat there breathing the same quiet air, letting the storm outside echo the storm settling inside each of us. Nathan leaned back again, closing his eyes. Thank you, Emily, for tonight, for everything. I shook my head gently. You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing my job. He opened his eyes, meeting mine with a depth that made me shiver. No, you're not. You're doing something much bigger than that. I felt my breath stop. Not from fear, from recognition, from the realization that something between us was shifting, settling into a place I hadn't anticipated but couldn't deny. Outside the window, the rain softened to a drizzle, the kind that lingers quietly after the storm has passed. Inside the silent lounge, Nathan leaned slightly toward me, not close enough to cross any lines, but close enough to let me feel the gravity drawing us together. The night had given him back his father, but it had also opened a door neither of us expected to find. And something told me this was only the beginning. The next evening, when I walked into Arthur's room, the lights were dimmed low. The sky outside tinted a deep violet as dusk settled across the courtyard. Arthur lay with his eyes closed, breathing steadily, his fingers twitching every so often, like something inside was trying to find its way back into the world. I whispered hello to him as I always did, smoothing the blanket near his arm. I was just about to begin checking his vitals when I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant ones. I turned and found Nathan standing in the doorway, his hair still damp from a late shower, his expression calmer than I had ever seen it. He lifted one small folded paper. Lyrics, he said quietly. "The song you sang yesterday, Smile." I blinked, taken aback. "You remembered the title." He walked in slowly, like someone stepping into a sacred place. "I remember everything you sing." My breath caught at the honesty in his voice. He stopped beside the foot of the bed, glancing at his father for a moment, before turning back to me, a nervous but hopeful look flickering across his face. "Could you teach me?" The question was so unexpected I almost laughed, but the awe in his eyes stopped me. "Teach you to sing?" He nodded. "I want to sing to him too. Maybe it will help him find his way back again." Something warm spread through my chest. No one had ever asked me to teach them before. Not like this. Not for a reason that mattered so deeply. I stepped closer. "All right. But I warn you, I'm strict." He smiled, something soft and boyish breaking through the exhaustion in his features. "I think I can handle strict." I moved to stand beside him close enough to feel the faint warmth of his shoulder. "Just breathe," I said gently. "Slow in. Slow out." He followed my lead awkwardly at first, his breath catching halfway like he wasn't sure whether to trust himself or the air around him. "Try again," I whispered. This time he inhaled fully, his shoulders rising, then falling with a shaky exhale. "Good." He glanced at me sideways. That felt ridiculous. I smiled. Singing often does. I hummed the opening note of Smile and tilted my head slightly, waiting for him to follow. He tried. The sound that came out was absolutely terrible. He winced. I burst into quiet laughter before covering my mouth. "I'm sorry," I said. "I shouldn't laugh." "No, go ahead. I deserve it." He shook his head, laughing too. "I sound like a dying lawnmower." But he tried again. And again. Each note wobbled, dipped, cracked, and sometimes completely disappeared. But he never stopped trying. After a few minutes, his voice steadied a little. Not good, but honest. And that mattered far more. "You're doing better than you think I told him." He raised an eyebrow. "That is extremely generous." "No, really. You're improving." He looked at me, something brightening in his eyes. "Do you mean that completely?" His breath softened. "Teach me more." So I did. I guided him line by line, adjusting his posture when he leaned too far back, tapping his shoulder when he tightened his throat, demonstrating how to relax his jaw so the notes could flow more easily. At one point, I placed 2 fingers under his chin to lift it slightly, and the moment our skin touched, he froze. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because something electric passed between us. He held still, eyes searching mine with a mixture of vulnerability and wonder. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, barely audible, "I'll sing better." I pulled my hand back gently, my cheeks warming. "I know you will." We turned back toward Arthur. I nodded encouragingly. "Sing the first line." Just the first. Nathan swallowed hard, glanced at his father, then began. "Smile though your heart is aching." The note broke halfway, but something in the room shifted. Arthur's eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched. The monitor blipped just slightly. Nathan gasped and looked at me like he wasn't sure if he had imagined it. "Keep going," I whispered urgently. He tried again, and though his voice cracked, each note carried something raw and earnest. "Smile, even though it's breaking." Arthur's breathing changed. Not dramatically. Just a deeper inhale like his body recognized the sound. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. He covered his mouth with one trembling hand, his voice trapped behind emotion too heavy to hold. I stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his back. "You're reaching him. You really are." Nathan shook his head slightly overwhelmed. "It's not me. It's you. It's your voice." I felt my own throat tighten. "It's both of us. Together." We stood there side by side, singing softly into the dim quiet of the room. My voice carried the melody steady and warm. His followed imperfectly, full of affection and longing. Together our voices made something fragile and beautiful, something that wove itself into the air around us. As we finished the last line, Arthur's hand lifted a fraction of an inch, brushing the blanket like he was trying to reach us. Nathan exhaled a long, broken breath, whispering, "Dad, please hear us." I squeezed Nathan's arm gently. "He is hearing you. I can feel it." Nathan looked at me then deeply, a kind of gratitude in his eyes that felt so intimate it almost frightened me. "Emily, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to." He shook his head. "I do. You're giving something back to him that I thought was gone forever, and something else. Something you don't even realize." My heart pounded. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. We went back to singing softer this time, humming together as Arthur settled again. Nathan's shoulder brushed mine. He didn't move away. Neither did I. It was the first night we became something like a team. Something like hope. Something like the beginning of a love neither of us had expected. 3 nights after Nathan and I first sang together for Arthur, the air inside Silver Pines felt different. Heavy, thick, like something was gathering in the walls waiting for the right moment to break loose. I felt it the moment I walked into the West Wing. The hall was too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but warns. I pushed Arthur's door open and froze. His breathing was off. Not the slow, steady rhythm I had grown used to, but shallow, rapid pulls like someone trying to sip air through a straw. His chest rose in uneven jerks. His nostrils flared every few seconds, a sign of respiratory distress. The monitor at his bedside flickered with readings I didn't like. I instinctively stepped to his side, touching his shoulder gently. "Arthur." It was a whisper, but the fear in it vibrated through the room. He didn't respond, his lips barely parted as he struggled to pull in air. I checked his oxygen cannula. Clear, tubing unkinked. But his oxygen saturation numbers were dropping. 88, 84, 81. No, no, no. Stay with me. I hit the call button, my fingers trembling as I increased his oxygen flow manually. A cold dread slid down my spine. He had been improving. He had been responding. He had spoken. This should not be happening. The hallway erupted behind me as nurses rushed in. Karen was first, of course, her expression pinched and sharp. "Step aside, Emily," but she didn't need to tell me. I had already stepped back, letting the crash team surround him. A respiratory nurse called out his numbers: oxygen dropping, heart rate unstable, possible aspiration. Lay him flat, suction ready. A doctor came barreling in, hair-messy scrubs, wrinkled from being woken abruptly. "What happened?" he demanded. "He was stable an hour ago," I said softly but urgently. His breathing changed suddenly. "It just happened." Karen shot me a glare like she thought I had caused it. I ignored her. My eyes were on Arthur. Nurses adjusted his position, started suctioning, trying to clear any obstruction. The doctor ordered a stat chest x-ray and rapid lab panel. Everything blurred into frantic motion, and in the middle of the chaos, Arthur's hand jerked once, then went frighteningly still. I felt my stomach drop. "Please, no." The crash team worked faster, instructions flying through the air. Saline ready, calling respiratory, prepare to intubate. I wanted to help to do something, but this was beyond my scope, beyond my reach, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I backed into the hallway, pressed my hands together, and whispered, "Please, hold on. Please." Then I ran. Not away, but toward the elevator, toward the lobby, toward the one person who had to know, Nathan. He always came around this time, even on nights he said he wouldn't. I burst through the doors of the entrance just as he stepped in from outside, shaking water off his coat. His expression brightened when he saw me. "Emily, hey, is everything?" He stopped mid-sentence. His smile fell. His eyes locked onto mine. Something's wrong. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. It's your father. He can't breathe. He's crashing. For 2 seconds, he didn't move. Then he dropped his coat onto the floor and sprinted past me down the hall through the double doors, running faster than any visitor I had ever seen. I chased after him. By the time we reached Arthur's room, the door was wide open, machines beeping wildly. Nurses clustered around the bed. They were bag ventilating him. A nurse blocked Nathan's path. "Sir, you can't be in here." Nathan shoved past with a force that surprised everyone. "That's my father." I followed him inside, my chest pounding with fear. Arthur lay still, too still, while the team fought to bring him back to stable. Nathan reached the bedside and grabbed his father's foot, the only part he could reach. "Dad!" His voice cracked like something inside him was breaking open. "Dad, please, please, stay." His shoulders shook, breath shuddering. I had never seen him come undone before. The doctor barked orders at the nurses. "He's not stabilizing. Prep the airway. Now!" Nathan's knees buckled slightly. He looked like he was about to collapse. I rushed to his side, grabbing his arm before he fell. "Nathan, look at me!" He lifted his face, drenched in tears. "I can't lose him again. Not after everything. Not after he came back." His chest heaved. "He's all I have." I squeezed his arm hard enough to ground him. "You're not losing him. He's fighting. He's listening." "Sing!" The word left my mouth before I could think. Sing here now. But something inside me insisted. Something deeper than logic or protocol or fear. Yes. Sing. For him. For you. For both of you. Nathan turned to the bed, trembling so badly he could barely stand. I steadied him with my hand around his elbow. "Sing to him, Nathan. He needs to hear you." He closed his eyes, took one shaking breath, then another, and he began, not loud, not strong, but raw and trembling and heartbreakingly human. "Smile though your heart is aching." His voice cracked so hard on the first syllable that I think every nurse in the room felt it. Smile, even though it's breaking. Tears slipped down his cheeks and dropped onto the sheet near Arthur's leg. As he sang, I joined him quietly, softly weaving my voice into his like a thread pulling two loosened pieces of fabric together. And something happened. The monitors beeped differently. The doctor looked up, heart rate rising slightly. Oxygen stabilizing. Peak pressure improving. Keep bagging. Nathan kept singing through tears, through shaking breath, through fear so thick he could barely swallow. The doctor finally exhaled tension draining from his shoulders. He's stabilizing. Slowly. But he's stabilizing. A nurse placed a hand on her chest. Thank God! Nathan nearly collapsed as relief crashed into him. I caught him again, guiding him into the chair beside his father. He gripped Arthur's hand with both of his forehead pressed to the blanket, breath shuddering. "Don't ever do that to me again, Dad. Please." I stayed with them until Arthur's breathing steadied, until the doctor nodded that he could remain on close watch instead of being moved to the ICU, until Nathan finally lifted his head and looked at me with eyes full of something too deep to name. "You stayed," he whispered. I nodded. Of course I stayed. He brushed a trembling hand over his face. "I don't think I can get through any of this without you." My heart ached in a way that felt dangerously close to splitting, because the truth was, I wasn't sure I could get through it without him either. Arthur's recovery over the next 48 hours felt like watching a tide struggle retreat, then fight its way back to shore, inch by inch. He remained fragile, his breathing light and thin, his eyelids barely stirring, his fingers twitching from time to time as if reaching for something he could almost grasp. But he was stable, alive, fighting, and through every hour of those 2 long days, Nathan barely left his side. I stayed close as well, sometimes sitting by Arthur's bed, sometimes sitting with Nathan in the hallway, sometimes quietly checking vitals while Nathan watched with a look that was equal parts fear and devotion. It was near midnight on the second night when everything changed again. I had just finished documenting Arthur's vitals when I saw his eyelids tremble. Not a flutter. Not the half reflex we had seen before. This was different. Intentional. His breathing deepened. His fingers curled slightly. I leaned forward, placing a soft hand on his wrist. Arthur. His eyes opened. Slowly. Carefully. As if lifting them took all the strength he had left. They didn't open wide at first, just enough for a sliver of awareness to slip through. But it was enough to make my own breath catch. I touched his shoulder gently. Arthur, can you hear me? His lips trembled. Dry. Cracked. Trying. I pressed the call light without taking my eyes off him. Nathan, who had dozed off in the chair outside the door, jolted awake at the sound and rushed in. What is it? What happened? I swallowed hard, emotion rising like a tide inside my throat. He's waking up. Nathan froze at the foot of the bed, his hand gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles paled. He stared at his father like he was afraid the sight was a dream he'd break by blinking. Arthur's eyes shifted, slowly, toward me, toward the sound of my voice. His lips moved again, a faint exhale escaping. Then his gaze drifted to Nathan. A tremor passed through his jaw, and then, in the smallest, softest voice I had ever heard, he whispered, Illy, my name, not slurred, not accidental. My name! I heard Nathan choke back a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. I felt my knees weaken, my throat burned, my eyes filled so fast I had to blink to see clearly. I leaned closer, my hand resting gently on Arthur's arm. I'm here, Arthur. I'm right here. He blinked slowly, focusing on me with effort, his eyes full of a fragile awareness that felt sacred. Thank you. The words were barely air, but they were words. Real, intentional, alive. Nathan stepped closer, his voice shaking. Dad, Arthur shifted his gaze toward him, his lips parted, forming a breath of recognition. Nathan. It broke Nathan instantly. Tears spilled down his cheeks before he even knew they were falling. He reached for his father's hand, gripping it gently but desperately. Dad, I'm here. I'm right here. Arthur squeezed his son's fingers with the slightest pressure, but it was enough. For Nathan, it was everything. Arthur turned his hand slightly, reaching for me with his fingertips. I placed my hand in his, carefully afraid to break the moment. He held both our hands and whispered something I had to lean in close to hear. Bring each other home. Nathan inhaled sharply. I felt something warm and shattering bloom inside my chest. Arthur's hand trembled, pressing ours together, bridging the two of us with a clarity that felt deeper than words. He blinked slowly, his breathing steady, the weight of years of pain and silence hanging between father and son, and now, somehow, me. Nathan wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, swallowing a sob. Dad, we're here. We're both here. We're not leaving. I nodded softly. We're with you. Arthur's eyelids grew heavier, his strength spent from the few words he managed to give us, but he didn't let go of our hands right away. He held on until the last of his energy faded into a calm, healing sleep. It felt like a blessing, a benediction, a fragile miracle placed gently into our palms. When his breathing settled into an easy rhythm, I looked up at Nathan. His expression broke me. Hope and heartbreak intertwined, gratitude and fear wrapped so tightly around each other it was hard to tell them apart. He sank into the chair beside me, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. Emily, he said my name in a hoarse whisper, not his father's voice now. His voice, thick with emotion. I moved closer, sitting beside him on the small padded bench near the bed. I didn't speak. I just placed my hand on his back, slow and steady. He lifted his face, eyes red and raw. I owe you everything. I shook my head, tears pooling again. You don't owe me anything. He took my hand suddenly gently but firmly, like someone afraid of losing their grip on the only solid thing in a dark room. You brought him back. You brought him back to me. I opened my mouth to answer, but my breath caught when he whispered the next words. And you brought me back too. The room felt impossibly still. The kind of stillness that feels full of something so sacred and fragile you don't dare move too quickly. I held his gaze, unsure if I was trembling from emotion or exhaustion. Nathan took a slow breath. His hand was warm around mine, his voice low. "Emily, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I know it's because of you." My heart thudded painfully. I squeezed his fingers, my voice barely a whisper. "We'll figure it out. Together." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of those words land. And when he opened them again, something had changed. Something quiet but undeniable. He leaned slightly closer, not enough to cross any lines, but enough that our shoulders touched. Enough that our breaths mingled in the soft glow of the monitor lights. Enough for both of us to know the truth neither of us had dared to name. Something was growing between us. Something tender. Something real. Something Arthur had seen before we did. And now that he had spoken my name, everything felt different. Like the world had shifted an inch toward something we both wanted but had been too afraid to reach for. I rested my head gently against Nathan's shoulder. He didn't move away. For the first time in years, the room felt full. Full of warmth. Full of healing. Full of possibility. And for the first time since I walked into Silver Pines, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The care facility felt different in the days after Arthur spoke my name. Nurses walked more gently. The lights seemed warmer. Even the air felt softer, as if the entire building breathed easier now that one of its forgotten souls had stepped back into the world. And Nathan was changing too, not in loud dramatic ways. In quiet ones. He stopped carrying his tension like armor. He smiled more often, even if the smiles were small. He started arriving earlier in the evenings, long before visiting hours, using the pretext of helping me with rounds, even though he clearly had no idea how to handle medical paperwork or replace bedding. He made me laugh more in 3 days than I had laughed in months. On Thursday afternoon, he walked into the staff lounge, holding 2 cups of tea from the cafe down the street. "For you," he said softly, handing me the one without sugar because he remembered, without asking, without trying, just remembering. I took it, my fingers brushing his briefly. "Thank you." He stood there watching me take a sip, the nervous anticipation in his eyes so genuine it melted something inside me. Better than the vending machine tea, 1,000 times better. "Good. I plan to replace every terrible cup you've ever had in this building." I laughed quietly. And with that simple laugh, something warm threaded itself between us again. Later that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the courtyard trees, I pushed Arthur's wheelchair toward the common room where a small gathering of residents waited for the week's scheduled music hour. They usually played old jazz through the speakers, but tonight the activities coordinator had asked me if I wanted to perform something live. Before I could say no, Nathan, who'd overheard the question, had answered for me. "She'll do it." My breath caught. "Nathan, I don't—" "You will," he said gently, turning to me. "You sing for one man every night. Tonight you can sing for a room full of people who need it just as much." His confidence in me was unnerving, and comforting, and terrifying, and exactly what I needed. So, at 7 o'clock, with the room filled with residents, nurses, aides, and staff, I stepped up to the microphone, the facility rarely used. Nathan stood in the back beside Arthur, who sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his posture stronger than I had ever seen it. The room dimmed slightly, the air thickened with anticipation, and I began to sing. It was a simple song, one my father used to hum while washing dishes. The kind of song made for quiet rooms and people who needed something gentle to hold on to. My voice wavered for the first few notes, nerves fluttering in my stomach. But halfway through the first verse, I looked up and saw Nathan. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying. He wasn't doing anything performative. He just looked at me like he'd never seen anything more honest, more human, more alive. And with that look, my voice steadied. The second chorus came out stronger. The bridge softened into something tender, and when the last note floated into the room, there was a moment of stillness so complete it felt like a held breath. Then the applause rose like a wave. Gentle clapping, soft cheers, a resident wiping tears from her eyes, another whispering to her neighbor. Beautiful, just beautiful. But it was what came next that carved itself into me. As the applause faded, an older woman with silver curls called out from the front row, her voice full of mischief and warmth. "Sweetheart, he looks at you like you're the song he waited 30 years to hear again." The room erupted in laughter. My face flushed. Nathan's eyes widened, then softened with embarrassment and something else. Something that made my pulse quicken. I looked at him. He looked at me. And the world seemed to tighten around the space between us. After the music hour, after the residents drifted back to their rooms and the hallways grew quiet again, I walked Arthur back to his room while Nathan carried the folded blanket and sheet music beside us. When we reached the doorway, Arthur touched my wrist gently. His voice was still soft but clearer every day. "Sing, more." I smiled. "Of course, Arthur. I'll sing any time you want." Nathan kneeled beside his father. "Dad, do you want a rest before the next therapy round?" Arthur nodded, but his eyes drifted to our hands, mine on the wheelchair, Nathan's resting on my arm. His gaze lingered with an awareness that sent a shiver across my skin. After Arthur was settled, Nathan and I stepped into the hallway. Everything felt too close, too quiet, too full. He leaned on the wall beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing my face with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "Emily." His voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant. I looked up at him. "Yes, I've been trying to figure out how to say this without scaring you away." My heart thudded. He took a breath. "When you walked into his room that first night, I thought you were just another nurse doing your shift. But then you sang, and everything in me shifted. Something I didn't even know was still alive started waking up." I swallowed hard. "Nathan." Let me finish," he said softly. "I've spent years keeping people at arm's length. Work, stress, expectations, grief. But every night I stood outside that door listening to your voice, something inside me started melting. You gave my father hope before you even knew him, and you gave me—" He stopped searching for words. "Something like a second chance." My eyes stung. Nathan stepped just a little closer. Not too much. Just enough. "Emily, I'm falling for you." The words fell between us like something fragile and holy. My breath shook. Nathan's eyes searched mine with quiet vulnerability. "You don't have to say anything tonight, or tomorrow, or any time soon. I just needed you to know, because whatever happens next, whatever we become, you've already changed me. Completely." I felt my hand lift on its own and rest lightly on his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath my palm, steady and real. I whispered, almost afraid to breathe, "I think I'm falling too." His eyes closed briefly, a quiet exhale, leaving his lips like relief he'd been holding for years. When he opened them again, they were full of something so tender it made my chest ache. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even touch my face. He simply took my hand in his, holding it with a care that felt like a promise. And in that quiet, dim hallway, surrounded by soft, beeping machines, distant footsteps, and the faint smell of disinfectant love, found both of us. Gently, unexpectedly, completely. 1 year later, the world inside Silver Pines felt nothing like the place I had first stepped into. What once felt cold and fluorescent now felt warm, bright, and strangely alive. The nurses joked more. The residents smiled more. Even the walls, once so silent, seemed to hum faintly with music. But nothing glowed brighter than Arthur Finch. Seeing him now sitting in the courtyard with sunlight brushing his face, you would never imagine he had once been a man trapped between worlds unreachable, untouchable, drifting somewhere none of us could follow. Today, he sat with his back straight, his hair brushed neatly by Nathan earlier that morning, and his fingers resting lightly on the piano keys of the upright instrument the facility had moved outdoors for this special day. It was the first warm afternoon of spring, the kind of day when flowers bloom overnight and the breeze carries the scent of earth waking up. Residents gathered in chairs around the courtyard chatting softly. Nurses wheeled out patients who otherwise rarely left their rooms. Even the usually grumpy maintenance man stood in the back pretending to check the light fixtures while clearly waiting for something. Nathan stood beside me at the garden entrance, adjusting his tie for the 5th time, even though it was already perfect. "You nervous?" I whispered, nudging him gently with my elbow. He exhaled, terrified. I smiled. "Welcome to my world." He took my hand for a brief moment, squeezing it with a tenderness that still surprised me. Even after a year, the way he held me always felt both new and familiar, like a melody I knew from childhood but had forgotten until someone hummed it again. "Ready?" I asked. "Not at all," he said. "Let's do it. Together." As we walked toward Arthur, conversations quieted. Heads turned, faces softened. The three of us had somehow become a story inside this building, a kind of living proof that something broken could knit itself back together if given enough care, patience, and music. Arthur looked up when we approached, his eyes bright and steady. "There you are," he said with a small grin, his voice still a little raspy but strong enough to make my heart swell. He winked at me. "I was beginning to think you'd leave me to perform alone." "Never," I whispered back. Nathan knelt beside his father's wheelchair, touching his shoulder. "You ready?" "Dad?" Arthur lifted one eyebrow. "Are you?" Nathan laughed under his breath. "Probably not." Arthur's fingers brushed the piano keys, testing their weight, rediscovering their familiarity. The courtyard grew quiet enough to hear birds landing on the branches overhead. For a moment, the only sound was the wind pressing gently through the leaves. Then Arthur began to play. It was Smile, the song that had woven all three of our lives together, the song that had awakened him, the song Nathan had sung to him the night he left for Switzerland, and the song I had sung the night I'd first seen his fingers move. The melody floated into the courtyard like something sacred, soft at first, a whisper of notes that carried years of memory inside them. Residents leaned forward. Nurses stopped pushing wheelchairs. Even the air seemed to still holding its breath for the story unfolding in front of it. Nathan watched his father with a look no son should ever have to wait a lifetime to give. A look full of pride, awe, love, and forgiveness. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. Arthur played the first verse alone. When the chorus came, he nodded at me. I stepped closer, placed one hand gently on the piano, and began to sing. My voice trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from a depth of emotion I could hardly hold inside. Nathan listened with the same reverence he had shown the very first time he heard me sing through a doorway. When the second verse began, he moved beside me. His voice joined mine, warm, imperfect, deeply human. The harmony settled between us like a promise. The courtyard filled with music and something else, something hopeful, something healing. Something that made every tired heart in that space lift just a little. When the final chord faded, the courtyard erupted in applause. Some residents clapped, others wiped tears. A few whispered blessings under their breath. Arthur leaned back, catching his breath, but his eyes sparkled with a joy that made him look 20 years younger. Now he said, his voice playful, pretending to scold Nathan. "Your turn." My turn for what Nathan asked, confused. Arthur nodded toward him, then at me, then toward his pocket. My breath caught. Nathan froze. "Dad?" He nodded again, insistently this time. "Do it." Nathan blinked, stunned, then slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Oh my God!" A hush fell across the courtyard. Even the birds seemed to still. Nathan stepped toward me, his hand trembling slightly as he held something small and velvet blue. "Emily," he said softly, "when I first heard you sing, I thought you were healing my father, but I didn't know you were healing me too." My throat tightened. He took another breath, his eyes shining. "You taught me that love doesn't arrive with noise or certainty. It comes softly, like a song you weren't expecting, like hope you didn't know you were allowed to feel." He sank onto one knee. The room, the courtyard, the sky, everything spun around us. I heard soft gasps. Someone clapped a hand over their mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my Lord." Nathan opened the small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple and stunning, a single emerald set in a delicate gold band. The stone shimmered like a drop of spring sunlight. "Emily Reed," he said, his voice trembling. "You brought my father back to me. You brought my life back to color. You brought me home. Will you marry me?" Tears flooded my eyes before I could stop them. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. Arthur's voice whispered behind me, filled with warmth. "Say yes, sweetheart." The world steadied. I nodded through tears. "Yes. Yes, Nathan. Yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands shaking with relief and joy. When he stood, I threw my arms around him, laughing and crying at once, as the courtyard filled with applause. Arthur played a triumphant chord behind us, his fingers pressing the keys with surprising strength. Nathan held me close, his forehead touching mine. "You changed us," he whispered. "All three of us." I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks. "No, Nathan, we changed each other." As the applause swelled and sunlight poured across the courtyard and Arthur played the song that had become the thread of our story, I realized something with absolute certainty. Sometimes a song meant for a stranger doesn't just reach one heart. Sometimes it heals an entire family. If this story stirred something in you, even the smallest tremble in your chest, then stay with me for a moment longer, because what happened to Emily, Nathan, and Arthur is more than just a sequence of events. It is a reminder of something we forget as we grow older, something life tries to take from us piece by piece, the truth that healing can come from the most unexpected corners that love can walk in when we have stopped looking, and that sometimes the smallest gesture a song whispered into a quiet room can rewrite the course of an entire life. Maybe as you listened, you found yourself remembering someone you once cared for, someone you sat beside in a hospital room late at night, wondering if they could hear your voice. Maybe you remembered a parent you loved deeply but drifted away from. Maybe you remembered the sound of someone singing to you or the warmth of a hand you wish you could hold again. Or maybe you simply felt that ache we all feel when we see a broken family slowly finding its way back to one another. Because the truth is, no matter how old we are, no matter how many losses we carry, no matter what mistakes we've buried in the quiet corners of our hearts, we all crave what Emily offered without even realizing it: kindness, presence, and the kind of love that doesn't demand attention but reveals itself softly, steadily, like a melody rising from silence. And maybe, just maybe, you saw a reflection of yourself in Nathan too. The moments when you closed your heart because life taught you it was safer that way. The years when you stayed busy so you wouldn't have to feel. The way you sometimes stood outside the door of your own life listening, too afraid to step inside. Stories like this are not fairy tales. They are reminders. Reminders that forgiveness is possible, that connection is never too late, that even after long stretches of silence, a father can still speak his son's name, and a son can still find his way back home. And if you felt that even for a second, then this story did exactly what stories are meant to do. It reached across the distance and placed a hand over your heart. That's why we tell these stories. That's why this channel exists. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting alone in a quiet room, thinking their chapter is closed, believing their chance at healing has passed. But stories like this whisper otherwise. Stories like this say, stay, listen, hope again, even if just a little. And if you want more moments like this, moments that lift you up, that make you believe in good people again, that remind you the world still holds softness, then I want to invite you to join our community. Here we tell stories that honor the quiet heroes, the caregivers, the brokenhearted, the people who love without applause, the people who choose kindness even when no one is watching. We share stories about second chances, about relationships mended after years of silence, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things through compassion alone. And if you choose to stay, if you choose to subscribe, you won't just be supporting a channel. You'll be joining thousands of others who believe in healing and hope, and in the simple truth that love still wins. So before you go, take a breath. Let your heart settle. Ask yourself, when was the last time you heard a story that made you feel something real? If this one did, then don't let it be the last. Like this video. Subscribe so you never miss another story that speaks to the deeper parts of you. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they begin with a single voice in a quiet room. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, truly remember it somewhere out there. Someone still needs your voice. Someone still needs your kindness. And the next chapter of your own healing may begin in a moment as small and simple as a song.